Red Bear's eyewitness testimony unveils the hidden truth of Custer's last stand. In an adrenaline-charged recounting, Red Bear, a seasoned scout, revisits the most intense moments of the Battle of Little Bighorn. With raw and vivid detail, he brings to life the chaos of gunfire, flying arrows, and the war cries that mark this historic conflict between two worlds. As a warrior who rode with Custer's 7th Cavalry, Red Bear provides a unique and rare insight into the cultural clash that defined the American frontier. His gripping testimony thrusts you into the heart of the battle, where the fate of a nation was at stake. So sit back and let's dive into this compelling story together. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support this community. Custer had ordered the charge and specifically instructed the scouts to seize the Dakota horses from their camp. The scouts surged down the dry run, and when Red Bear reached the solitary teepee, he found the others already circling it, lashing it with their whips. He joined them, and they paused at the lodge for about half an hour. One of the scouts remarked, "There's plenty of provisions here." One feather stepped inside the teepee, tasting the soup left for a fallen Dakota warrior and eating some of the meat. Just then Custer appeared with Fred Gerard, who shouted, "You are supposed to move," directly into the Sioux village. While the scouts were examining the teepee, Custer, who had outpaced his soldiers, and chastised them with both words and gestures, saying, "I told you to charge ahead, not linger. You have disobeyed me. Step aside and let the soldiers take the lead in the charge." Custer declared, "If any man among you lacks bravery, I'll take his weapons and deem him a woman." One scout replied, "Tell him that if he does the same to his white soldiers, who are less brave than we are, it will take him a very long time." The scouts laughed and signaled their readiness for battle. They pushed forward, but Red Bear noticed that about 50 yards past the solitary teepee, Custer veered to the right with his men. Gerard continued with the scouts, accompanied by Young Hawk Goose, Black Fox, Red Star, Strikes 2, Bloody Knife, Bobtailed Bull, Forkturn, Red Foolish Bear Boy Chief, Little Brave, and One Feather. They rode hard, charging down to the Little Bighorn. And as they crossed the river, they approached the Dakota camp. After crossing, they split up again. 6 scouts veered sharply to the right, where the Dakota horses were grazing near the timber. Boy Chief and Red Star led the way, followed by Strikes 2, Black Fox, Little Sioux, and One Feather. Bloody Knife's group pressed towards the Dakota camp's point. Far ahead, Bloody Knife returned with 3 horses, shouting, "Someone take these horses back to the hill. One is for me." Red Bear didn't see Bloody Knife due to the dust, but later learned who it was. This group consisted of Bloody Knife, Young Hawk, Goose, Fork Tongue, Red Bear, Bobtailed Bull, and 2 Crow Scouts. They converged at the Sioux camp's point and opened fire with their carbines. They dismounted and began shooting. The Dakotas lying out of sight on the bluffs or hills returned fire. No one was on horseback at that moment. They were firing from less than a quarter-mile away. Fort Horn at the timber's edge called out, "Come this way." As they crossed towards the Dakota village at the ford, the soldiers caught up with them. They moved more to the left, and Red Bear saw soldiers lining up across the river. To his right, all was chaos and confusion. He recognized no white soldier or officer. When Bloody Knife called out about the horses, the soldiers hadn't dismounted yet, but were already with the scouts. As Forked Horn called out, Red Bear mounted and rode towards him. As Red Bear reached Forked Horn and dismounted, he noticed a Dakota horse shot in the neck or cheek, approaching the line where Young Hawk was standing. Young Hawk struck the horse, saying, "I strike an enemy's horse." The white soldiers were shouting and calling out. Young Hawk then rode up to Red Bear and said, "Uncle, I have struck the bay horse, and it's mine. I give it to you. You have a rope. Take the horse for yourself." Red Bear responded, "What's the use? We're in the middle of fighting, and I might be killed. I'll have no use for it." Young Hawk then rode back to his position. Just then Little Brave emerged from the timber and warned that he overheard the Dakotas in their camp preparing to charge. He said, "Let me fire one shot at the camp, and then let's retreat to the hill, for they outnumber us." As Little Brave dismounted to fire, Red Bear held his horse. Little Brave quickly returned, alerting Red Bear that the Dakotas were about to charge, and advised them to mount and ride back to the timber, and then across the river. As they rode through the bushes towards the river, they came under fire from an ambush just across the Little Bighorn. The Dakotas were hidden in the bushes, firing from the ground. The scouts retraced their steps to where they started. As they rode towards the river, they saw a massive wave of Dakota horsemen between the ridge and the river, riding towards the ford, shouting and firing. The area was swarming with them. Red Bear dismounted when the Dakotas opened fire and led his horse, but a leaning tree struck his saddle horn, halting the horse. He repeatedly tugged at the horse's head until it finally moved forward, though the saddle girth broke, causing him to lose his extra cartridges. He attempted to mount but fell twice as his canteen got caught under him. Finally, he managed to mount and chased after Little Brave, who had not dismounted and was far ahead. Emerging from the timber, he lost sight of Little Brave, but saw someone riding ahead, barely visible through the smoke and dust. He then saw 10 soldiers on horseback, retreating towards the timber. At that moment, a deep cut caused the soldiers' horses to stumble, and he heard them shouting. He steered his horse left, avoiding the cut, and left the struggling soldiers behind. He continued to follow Little Brave until the dark figure ahead turned left. Thinking it couldn't be Little Brave, he rode straight on, passing the point where the rider had turned left. Red Bear's horse stumbled and fell, throwing him off. The horse then bolted towards the river, and Red Bear gave chase. In this open area with few trees and many rose bushes, a long dry limb got caught in the bridle and dragged behind the horse, bringing it to a stop. Red Bear caught up, but the horse was spooked and jumped around, making it difficult for him to control it with only his left hand, as he still held his carbine in his right. Suddenly, he saw a painted Dakota warrior riding towards him, upstream on his right. The warrior's face was painted red below and yellow above, with yellow paint also around his forehead and eyes. Red Bear shot the Dakota, who fell from his horse. The horse reared up, wheeled back, and fled. Red Bear could now only hear the continuous firing of carbines and the piercing whistles of the Dakotas. He followed his horse to the river and saw it swimming across. He leaped into the water, swam to the horse, caught it by the mane, and they crossed the river together. As he emerged from the water, he saw the horse of the Dakota he had shot swimming behind him. The dark bay horse had a white streak on its forehead and a string of deer hooves around its neck that rattled as it swam. This horse crossed the river a little upstream from him. He saw a Little Brave who had already crossed and was wounded under his right shoulder, with blood streaming down his white shirt. Little Brave's horse was trotting slowly towards the ridge, but not upstream, towards Red Bear. Red Bear approached the spot where the Dakota horse had crossed, intending to drive it towards Little Brave. Suddenly, through the bushes on his left, downstream came Bob-tailed Bull's horse, its reins and rope flying, mane and tail flowing in the wind. The horse was terrified and ran snorting past Red Bear. Just a few yards away, he saw that the saddle was covered in blood. In front, 5 or 6 white soldiers emerged from the bushes, having crossed the river, and Bob-tailed Bull's horse followed them. The Dakota horse Red Bear was driving after the others. Little Brave was still riding slowly and waved his hand at Red Bear to be careful. The Dakotas were firing down at them from the hills above. Red Bear interpreted Little Brave's gesture as a request to catch one of the horses for him, as his own was exhausted. So Red Bear dismounted and grabbed a rope, trailing from one of the 2 horses, either the Dakota horse or Bob-tailed Bull's. But the horse was frightened and dragged him through the bushes, causing him to lose his moccasins in the river and injure his bare feet on the rose bushes. The horse pulled him upstream towards the end of the ridge, while Little Brave and the soldiers rode towards the Dakota firing line. Eventually, Redbird released the rope and mounted his own horse. Redbird didn't see Little Brave again and assumed the soldiers had all been killed. As Red Bear approached the ridge, he saw many soldiers in retreat. At the front was Reno, with a white handkerchief tied around his head, foam gathering at his mouth and beard, and his eyes wild with fear. Mistaking Red Bear for a Dakota warrior, Reno's men raised their carbines to shoot. But Red Bear rode close to Reno, slapped him on the chest with an open hand, and shouted, "Scout!" Reno, in a panic, shouted, "The Sioux! The Sioux!" When asked where, Red Bear pointed down the ridge, indicating the enemy's position. An officer with 3 stripes handed Red Bear some cartridges, calling him John the Soldiers. Frantic and disorganized, fired haphazardly at the Dakotas positioned higher on the ridge. A stray bullet grazed Red Bear's coat at the armpit. As a wounded Dakota horse ran towards them, Red Bear attempted to catch it, but the soldiers shot the animal down. Reno's group made a brief halt, but Reno struggled to keep his men from falling apart. Eventually, the Dakotas retreated and stopped firing. The remaining scouts regrouped with Reno's men. 7 scouts were missing: Young Hawk Bloody Knife, Bobtail Bull, Lil Brave, Red Foolish Bear, and Goose. After failing to catch the wounded horse, Red Bear remounted and lost sight of Little Brave, who had been slowly riding towards him. As he crested the ridge, Red Bear encountered White Cloud, a Dakota scout who informed him that the Iroquois scouts had captured some Dakota horses but hadn't returned yet. White Cloud suggested they join the other scouts with the horses. Red Bear led 2 horses he had and found, White Cloud led 1 approaching a small hill. They spotted 4 riders in the distance. Mistaking them for Dakotas, they turned back toward Reno's position. However, the riders were Crow Scouts, who recognized Red Bear and waved friendly greetings. Red Bear called back White Cloud, noting the distinctive red shoulders painted on the Crow Scouts' white shirts. The Crow Scouts halted and the group rode together. The Crow Scouts reported that 2 of their comrades had been killed on the ridge and planned to retrieve their bodies before returning. Red Bear and White Cloud waited. But after a long time, Red Bear suggested they return to Reno's position, assuming the Crow Scouts wouldn't come back. They found Reno and his soldiers still there, and soon the scouts who had retrieved fresh horses returned as well. The scouts began to arrive, starting with Bull in the Water, followed by Strikes 2, Red Star, Boy, 1 Chief, Feather Soldier, stabbed Strikes the Lodge, and Little Sioux. Later, more scouts arrived, with a herd of about 40 captured horses, including Charging Bulbul, Red Wolf, and White Eagle at Reno's position. The soldiers were on higher ground, while the scouts gathered about 10 rods away. Down the slope, Stabbed rode around giving a speech. "What are we doing, scouts? We should follow Custer's orders. If we're defeated, he told us to fall back to the Powder River, where the rest of the scouts' wagons and provisions are." Pretty Face, who had joined them from the pack mule train, was also present. Red Bear hadn't seen the mule train, but Pretty Face was likely, with the herd scouts on their way back. The soldiers were partially dismounted, and Red Bear didn't notice any officers. The scouts discussed the loss of 7 of their comrades, and Red Bear was relieved to be reunited with the others. Stabbed instructed some scouts to take the horse herd, while the rest stayed behind to fend off the Dakotas. The scouts chosen to go with the horses were Bull in the Water, Charging Bull, Red Wolf, White Red Eagle, Star, Pretty Face, Bear 1 Feather, a Dakota scout, and they set off with the herd. Those who remained behind were Strikes 2, Stab Soldier Bur Chief Strikes, the Lodge Little Sioux, White Cloud CIRU, Dakota Scouts ESC, Half-Breed Dakota Interpreter, and Bull. The 10 scouts leading the horse herd had barely begun their journey when another Dakota scout, Bear Wading Mataska, joined the group tasked with holding off the Dakotas. Red Bear and his fellow scouts continued on, passing the lone teepee and traveling 6 miles beyond it. By sundown, they followed the same trail they had taken earlier that morning. Shortly, Bull caught up with them, sent by Strikes 2, with a message to hasten their pace, as the Dakota tents were being dismantled and they feared a pursuit. Bull joined the group, and after sunset, Red Wolf and Bull in the Water rode ahead of the herd. As darkness fell, they heard 3 shots fired ahead of the herd, alarming the scouts. They quickly surrounded the herd and rode forward, reaching the Rosebud Valley in the darkness. The 2 scouts who had been ahead fell back upon hearing the shots and rejoined the herd, concluding that the Dakotas were approaching and they needed to escape. They selected fresh horses and rode ahead, the remaining scouts driving the herd from behind. saw a cloud of dust and dirt flying from the trail behind them, indicating the Dakotas were in pursuit. They, too, took fresh horses and rode around the herd, continuing until they saw the black timber ahead. Exhausted and thirsty, they halted at the timber's edge, while one scout rode ahead to find a muddy waterhole. Over a cut bank, the scout called out to the others, and they led their horses over the bank, sliding down to the waterhole. Each scout created a makeshift drinking spot with their hands and drank from the hole as it filled with water. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough water for the horses. As they rested and talked, Whole Buffalo mentioned that he knew the way out, and they followed him to the Rosebud River, reaching it at midnight. They continued on to the present-day Cheyenne Agency, arriving at daylight next. They climbed a high ridge and halted, gazing down at the site of the Dakota Sundance. The Dakota scout advised them to stay put for the day, as they could observe their surroundings in all directions. They spent the day resting, with some scouts sleeping while others kept watch. At sundown, they resumed their journey, riding through the night until they reached the camp where Bloody Knife had been drunk at dawn. The scouts scavenged for food among the camp remains and found meat and hardtack for breakfast. They crossed the Rosebud River at the same spot as before and discovered that Stab's scout party had already crossed ahead of them, in haste recognizing their tracks from Stab's mule. Following the Rosebud to its mouth, they arrived at the old camp and last parade ground. Finding remnants of a recent campfire, including cooking cans, they deduced that this was the breakfast camp of the party ahead, and with the time now around noon, proceeded down the Rosebud's bank to find boxes of partially spoiled hardtacks. They packed these onto their saddles and continued on their way. The party, led by Strikes 2, mistook Red Bear's group for Dakota Indians and hastened their pace, disappearing from sight. Red Bear's party followed the old Custer trail at a slow pace until they neared the Tongue River, then camped in the timber on top of a ridge. The next morning, they crossed the Tongue River and came upon the site where a soldier had been clubbed to death. Continuing on, they reached the Powder River camp, where they found Strikes 2's party, a company of infantry, and a wagon train led by the commander, wearer of the white hat from Fort Buford. Through interpreters, the Santee, Half-Breed, Dakota, and Crowbear Grove the scouts shared their knowledge of the battle with the officer. He gathered the scouts and instructed them to bring in their horses, selecting the best two for Foolish Bear and White Cloud to carry messages to the officer, who had traveled up the Elk River by steamboat to the Bighorn River mouth. The two scouts swam their horses across the Yellowstone or Elk River, pulling a small raft. With their carbines and a message bag, they rode to the Bighorn mouth, returning after several days to summon Strikes 2 and Bull in the water to cross over and carry the mail to Fort Buford. Foolish Bear and White Cloud then recrossed the river, rejoining the other scouts. Red Bear never saw Little Brave again, believing that all the soldiers had been killed. I hope this first-hand account gives you a deeper understanding of the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for more videos, where we'll dive into more first-hand accounts of different battles. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.